Somewhere in Lancashire, England, in the winter of 1764, a man named James Hargreaves watched a spinning wheel fall over on its side. The spindle kept turning, and something clicked in his mind that would never quite click back into place. That is the story, anyway. Like most origin myths of the Industrial Revolution, it is probably too clean, too neat, too perfectly arranged to be entirely true. The real story of the spinning jenny is messier, more contested, and far more interesting than a wheel falling over in a cottage. It is a story about a machine that arrived quietly, spread like a rumor, and then detonated the world it entered like a slow-burning bomb. To understand what the spinning jenny did, you first have to understand what spinning was before it existed. In the mid-18th century, spinning was one of the most common forms of work in Britain. It happened in cottages, in farmhouses, in the back rooms of homes across Lancashire, Yorkshire, and beyond. Women and children sat at spinning wheels and drew raw wool or cotton fiber into thread, hour after hour, day after day. It was slow, repetitive, and absolutely essential. The textile trade ran on it. A single weaver could exhaust the output of several spinners just to keep one loom supplied with thread. There was never enough thread. There was always more demand than the existing workforce could meet. This was the problem that Hargreaves, a weaver and carpenter from Oswald Twistle, was turning over in his mind. He was not a scientist. He was not wealthy. He had no laboratory and no institutional backing. He was a practical man with a practical problem, and he worked on it the way practical men do, by building things, breaking them, and building them again. What he eventually built was deceptively simple. A wooden frame holding multiple spindles arranged vertically, all driven by a single wheel turned by hand. Where a traditional spinning wheel produced one thread at a time, the jenny produced 8. Later versions produced 16. Eventually, 80. One operator. One machine. Dozens of threads simultaneously. The mathematics of that leap were staggering. A single person with a spinning jenny could now produce what had previously required a roomful of workers. Hargreaves named it the jenny. Nobody knows exactly why. Some historians believe it was named after his wife or his daughter. Others think it was simply a common name used for mechanical devices at the time. What matters is not the name but what it represented. For the first time in the history of textile production, a machine had fundamentally multiplied the productive capacity of a single human body. Not by a little, by an order of magnitude. And the world was not ready for it. The first jennies were used quietly, privately, in homes and small workshops. Hargreaves did not immediately rush to patent or publicize his invention. He used it himself and shared it with neighbors, and for a while it spread the way useful tools spread in tight-knit communities, person to person, workshop to workshop, without fanfare. But useful tools have a way of making themselves known. And when the spinners of Lancashire began to realize what this machine meant for their livelihoods, the quiet period ended very abruptly. In 1768, a mob broke into Hargreaves's home and destroyed his jennies. They were not vandals. They were workers. Skilled workers who had spent years, sometimes entire lifetimes, developing the hand and eye coordination that spinning required. And they could see, with absolute clarity, what this machine was going to do to them. They were not wrong. They were just too late. Here is what tends to get left out of the triumphant version of this story. The spinning jenny did not create prosperity for the people who had been spinning. It created prosperity for the people who owned the machines. Those are not the same group. They were almost never the same group. In the years immediately following the jenny's spread through the textile districts of Britain, the price of spun thread collapsed. More thread was being produced, faster, by fewer people. That is good news if you are a weaver who needs thread, or a merchant who sells cloth, or a mill owner who is about to build a factory full of jennies and hire a skeleton crew to run them. It is catastrophic news if you are one of the hundreds of thousands of hand spinners whose income has just been undercut by a machine that never sleeps and never asks for a raise. The cottage spinners did not disappear overnight. The transition took decades, and during those decades the hand spinners existed in a kind of economic purgatory, still working, but working for less and less as the machine-spun thread drove down the price of their labor. They could not compete, and they could not stop competing because they had no other options. The cottage industry that had sustained rural families across Britain for generations was being hollowed out from the inside, and the people experiencing that hollowing out had no framework for understanding what was happening to them, no language for it, no legal recourse, and no political representation. Meanwhile, the machine kept improving. Richard Arkwright, a barber-turned-entrepreneur with an extraordinary instinct for industrial organization, took the basic principle of mechanized spinning and scaled it in a direction Hargreaves had never imagined. Where the jenny was still a hand-powered device suited to cottage or small workshop use, Arkwright's water frame, patented in 1769, just 1 year after the mob destroyed Hargreaves's home, was powered by water and designed from the ground up for factory production. It produced a stronger thread than the jenny. It ran continuously, and it required a building, a water source, and a workforce of supervised laborists rather than a network of independent home workers. This is the moment the Industrial Revolution stops being about a clever device and starts being about a system. Arkwright did not just build a better spinning machine. He built a new way of organizing human labor around machines. The factory. Workers on schedules. Supervised production. Output measured and recorded. Time itself reorganized around the rhythm of the machine rather than the rhythm of the seasons or the family or the individual body. Hargreaves, the man who started it all, did not prosper from his invention the way the story might suggest he deserved to. He failed to patent the jenny in time to prevent others from copying it freely. By the time he pursued legal action, the device had spread so widely that the courts ruled against him on the grounds that he had allowed it into public use before seeking protection. He died in 1778, relatively poor, his invention running in workshops and early factories across Britain, making fortunes for other men. There is something almost unbearably fitting about that. The man whose machine displaced the livelihoods of thousands of workers was himself displaced by the system his machine helped create. The Industrial Revolution had a way of doing that, of using people up and moving on without looking back. By the 1780s, the spinning jenny had already been superseded in industrial terms by more powerful water and steam-driven machines. But its significance was not diminished by being overtaken. If anything, the jenny matters more because it came first. It was the proof of concept. The demonstration that a single machine could multiply human productive output so dramatically that the entire economic logic of an industry could be rewritten in a generation. And that rewriting had consequences that are still rippling forward today. The most immediate consequence was the factory system itself. Once it became clear that machines could produce thread and cloth faster than any network of home workers, the economic pressure to centralize production became irresistible. Mills were built. Workers were recruited, or compelled, to leave their homes and report to a building at a set hour and work until they were told to stop. The independence that cottage workers had maintained, imperfect and precarious as it was, evaporated. In its place came the wage, the clock, the oversay, and the machine. The Luddites, whose name has been so thoroughly misunderstood by history that it has become a casual insult, were in large part the direct descendants of the mob that broke into Hargreaves's home in 1768. They were skilled textile workers, framework knitters, and handloom weavers, who watched the machines erase the value of their expertise and responded by destroying the machines. Between 1811 and 1816, Luddite uprisings swept across the English Midlands and North. The British government responded by making machine breaking a capital offence and deploying more troops to suppress the Luddites than Wellington had under his command in the Peninsular War against Napoleon. Let that land for a moment. The British state considered its own textile workers a greater threat than the French army. The Luddites lost. The machines won. And within a generation the handloom weavers who had once been among the best paid skilled workers in Britain were among the most desperately poor, their craft made worthless, their communities hollowed out, their children sent to work in the very factories that had destroyed their parents' livelihoods. But here is the question that the spinning jenny forces us to sit with, and it is not a comfortable one. Was this inevitable? Was there a version of mechanized textile production that could have absorbed its human cost differently, that could have shared its productivity gains more broadly, that could have treated the displaced cottage workers as stakeholders in the new system rather than obstacles to be economically eliminated? The mill owners and the politicians of the time said no. They said the market would sort it out. They said progress could not be stopped and should not be slowed. They said the same things that are said today when automation displaces workers in warehouses and call centers and accounting firms. The spinning jenny did not cause the Industrial Revolution, but it announced it. It was the first clear signal that the relationship between human labor and productive output was about to be permanently renegotiated, and that the renegotiation would not be conducted on equal terms. The machine would have the leverage. The worker would have the choice of adapting or being left behind. James Hargreaves watched a spinning wheel fall over and saw a possibility. Hundreds of thousands of spinners across Britain saw the same machine and saw something else entirely. They saw the future arriving without asking their permission. And they were right to be afraid of it.